The Gemara tells us that the Malachim, the angels, ask a question. Why is it that the Jewish people do not say Hallel on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur? Apparently they looked down, saw the Jewish nation gathered in shuls, and the question that they had is that Hallel should be part of the davening, it should be part of the Nusach. Why isn't it part of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur davening? And Hashem answers them, Efshir, is it possible, Melech Yoshev al Kisei Din, a king is going to sit on the throne of judgment. Sifrei Chaim v'Sifrei Malchus Pesuchim l'fanav, the books of life and the books of death that are open in front of him. V'Yomru Shira, and they're going to sing jubilation, joy, rejoicing. It's inappropriate. And that's the Gemara. The Malachim had a question, the angels had a question, and Hashem answered. And I'd like to ask one simple question on this Gemara, and that is as follows. I am made of flesh and blood, mortal. We human beings get very trapped into our feelings, emotions. We live very much in a temporal state. So if I get angry, I view the whole world in a skewed way. If I feel jealousy, my world perspective changes. My ability to see beyond myself is very limited. But this question was not asked by one of us, and this question was asked by celestial beings, Malachei Asharetz, the highest level of angels. No physicalities, no blockages, pure intellect, pure understanding. Yet the question that they asked seems to be very difficult to understand. Of course, it's inappropriate. If the Jewish nation are being judged for life or death, if the world itself is being determined whether it will continue or not, isn't it obvious that you don't sing out joy, jubilation, Hallel isn't appropriate? What was the Malachim's question? What were they thinking? What were they asking? And I'd like to see if we could understand, in fact, what the Malachim were asking and better understand what this Gemara shares with us. And to do that, I'd like to share with you an understanding of the issues of Rosh Hashanah. The Mishnah tells us, Kol Ba'i Olam, every occupant of the planet, young, old, noble, plain, regular, every human being stands in front of Hashem for judgment, and Hashem meets out their fate, determines what will be. If you'd like to understand the extent of the judgments, listen to the words of Nisan Tokef. Which nations will go to war, which will enjoy prosperity? Which nations will suffer famine? Which nations will reach new heights? Which technologies will be brought to the marketplace? Which new diseases will suddenly appear? Which new cures will be discovered? If you'd like to understand fundamentally the judgment on Rosh Hashanah, all you have to imagine is a multi-tiered chessboard, and Hashem as the Grand Master arranging this pawn to be in this place, and this bishop to be here, a judge, a shofet, controlling, running mankind's future. But to put this into perspective, I'll give you one simple observation. The headlines of the New York Times are written on Rosh Hashanah. But it's not just that day's headlines, the entire week's, the month, every headline of that coming year is written on Rosh Hashanah. But it's not just the headlines. It's the international section, the national, the local, the op-ed page. A few years ago, the New York Times bragged about having 265 full-time reporters, 40 full-time photographers, because on this planet occupied by some 7 billion people, there are a lot of issues, a lot of things going on. A Chumash, a Bible, contains about 500,000 words. A Sunday edition of the New York Times contains about 2 million words. If you were to read it out loud, it would take you over 20 hours. Why? Because there are a lot of things going on in this world. A lot of things happening. And if you imagine, if you understand that Hashem is the judge, deeming what is appropriate, determining mankind's future, making every pawn put into its place in the right motions, in the right time. But sometimes you have to really carefully pay attention to the words. If you listen to the words of Nissan Tokef, which really describe the day, there's a very clear observation. You see, it's not just who will live and who will die. First, Hashem globally judges the world. Kama yavrun v'kama yibareun. How many will pass and how many will be born? From a global perspective, from 35,000 feet, Hashem determines how many will leave this earth. In the United States of America, approximately 2.5 million people die every year, approximately 600,000 of heart disease, approximately 500,000 of cancer-related issues. First, Hashem creates a large number. How many are to leave this earth this year? How many are to be born? And then it's mi yichya umi yamus. Who will fill in the slots? It's you and you go into this group, you and you go into this group. But the entire humanity, the entire globe, under one glance, one vision, Hashem is the master running the world. We changed the language in Shemona Esrei from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. We no longer say Hakel HaKadosh, it's now HaMelech HaKadosh. And the Mishnah Berurah explains why. We refer to Hashem as Hashem manifests himself in the world. Hashem is boundless, limitless. There is no ability for human being to comprehend something boundless and limitless. The only way we can relate to Hashem is based on the way Hashem manifests himself, the way Hashem acts within the world. During the course of the year, it's Hakel HaKadosh, the God, the holy God who's hidden behind the scenes, running the events of the world, but behind shadows barely noticeable. But from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur, that's not the expression we use. And the Mishnah Berurah explains why. Because during these days, Hashem is Mare Mamshalto. Hashem demonstrates his sovereignty, V'shebahu Bakol Mashallah, and he demonstrates that he alone runs the world. The reason why we change the language is because Hashem manifests himself differently. It's no longer hidden, no longer behind the scenes. Hashem's presence is much more accessible, much more available. You could feel Hashem's presence, and you could recognize Hashem as the one who created the world, maintains the world, and keeps everything happening as it should be. And the reason why you're not Yotzei Shemona Esrei if you say Hakel HaKadosh is because you missed the mark. That's not how Hashem is acting. Normally Hashem is hidden, but from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur, Hashem acts differently. You're able to relate to Hashem differently. Hence, we have to use a different expression. The Pele Yoetz gives a mushal. He says, imagine a man holds a candle. Imagine a man's holding a candle right here, but my eyes are closed. So I can't see the flame, but I'm aware of the light. That's Hashem's presence between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Far more accessible, far more almost tangible, if you may. You could feel Hashem, you could relate to Hashem, and you could understand the world in a different way. Now, our relationship to Hashem has two dimensions to it. We are avodim, we are servants of Hashem, but we're also banim, we're also children. And during the course of the year, I believe that a Jew should feel a sense of outrage, the audacity. Not only don't they recognize Hashem as the creator, as the benefactor, but they have the audacity to malign his holy people. Every time there's another claim from the UN that the Jews, the Palestinians are oppressed by the Israelis, and every time there's another attempt to discredit the Jewish people, there should be a sense within us of utter outrage. The hair on the back of your head should stand up. What a chutzpah, these are Hashem's holy nation. But from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, I believe there should be a very different sense. Because now we get to relate to Hashem, we get to feel Hashem as the Melech, as the King. We get to relate to Hashem as the one who is actively involved in running the world. We get to experience Hashem being involved. And at that point, a Jew should say, wow, Baruch Hashem. Hashem is finally showing himself as the Melech, as the King. And that comprehension should bring us to a tremendous sense of joy, happiness, and I believe we should wish to sing out Hallel. I believe that's what the Malachim asked. Why aren't the Jewish nation singing out praises? Why aren't they sitting there with a sense of joy in their hearts? They should say Hallel. Why? Because a Jew can experience, can understand things on Rosh Hashanah that you can't understand the rest of the year. You could relate to Hashem, and you could relate to the world. You could understand life in a vastly different way, and that should bring you to an utter sense of joy, happiness, and you should wish to sing out Hallel. However, Hashem answered the Malachim. That was their question, but Hashem said, it may be true. It could be you're right, that in a global sense, it's magnificent, it's wondrous. But that sense has to be tempered. You see, mankind as a unit is being judged, but I too am a member of that race. And as the world's fate is being determined, so too is my fate, my spouse's fate, my children's fate, the fate of my community. I am a member of this world. And so this sense of jubilation, of joy, of getting to experience Hashem, relating to the world in a deeper way, should be present, but tempered, held in check with an understanding that there's a certain gravity to the issues, certain gravity to the day. But I believe what this Gemara is sharing with us is that both emotions should be there. When you walk into shul, there should be a sense of, wow, what a wondrous day, what I could experience, what I could relate to, what I could understand today that I cannot begin to understand any other day of the year. From Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, there's a heightened sense of awareness, a heightened sense of understanding. And if you use the days properly, you could reach totally different levels of emunah, bitachon, understanding Hashem's involvement. And you should walk into shul with joy in your heart, tempered, held in check with the reality that there is a lot to daven for, a lot going on. But both emotions should be there. Now, with that as a background, I'd like to ask you what I consider an obvious question. We all get it. We're all maminim. I get it. Hashem created the world, maintains the world, runs the world. I got it. And we also understand the power of tefillah, of prayer, over and over, from the Avos, through Nevi'im, through the Gemara, through the Rishonim, over and over we're told, ask, ask, ask. Many times Hashem will answer directly. Not everything that you ask for will you be granted, but there's no tefillah that goes to waste. And we're told how many times Hashem will wait for us to ask. We're told over and over the power of prayer. So here's the question. If I get it, if I understand that Hashem is the judge, and I understand that my future, my family, is in the docks, is being weighed, and I know the power of prayer, wouldn't you imagine that my Shemona Esrei would be hours long, tears streaming down my face, crying, begging, beseeching Hashem, please. And while it's true that the davening of Rosh Hashanah is different than the davening during the rest of the year, I'm not sure that hours long, tears streaming down our cheeks is exactly an apt description of most people's Shemona Esrei. And the question is, why not? If I get it, if I understand it, how could I not be sitting there imploring, begging, beseeching hour after hour? So I'd like to share with you why I believe it's difficult to daven on Rosh Hashanah. There are actually two reasons. The first reason is because we live in unique times. Never in the course of history has there been this much opulence, wealth, luxuries available to the common man. The average person today living in our lifestyle enjoys luxuries that kings of yesteryear could not envision or imagine. And just as an illustration, I live in a house in Muncie. Baruch Hashem, it's a nice house. I'm by no stretch of the imagination a wealthy individual, but I looked at my house as compared to the first Lord Rothschild's house of the 1700s. International financier, world-famous individual, the Bank of Europe is based on him. My house is nicer. My house is larger. In addition to which, I have indoor plumbing, which he certainly didn't have. I have electricity, which he certainly didn't have. I have air conditioning and cooling, heating. When you look at kings who lived 300 years ago, each and every one of us has so much more in material possessions and luxuries that there's no basis of comparison. I drive a Toyota Camry, plain vanilla. It doesn't get plainer than that. The King of England rode in the royal coach, pulled by 12 white steeds. But the royal coach had wooden wheels, and there were pothole-filled roads. And when the King of England got into the royal coach and sat down, he went for 7 hours. Or if he had to go to France to the Earl's wedding, it was 7 days of back-breaking travel. I get into my Toyota Camry, air-cushioned ride, and 6 speakers, surround sound. I don't like the balance. I change the treble. I change the bass. I have a graphic equalizer because Toyota gives it to me. But when you think about the common person today, we have luxuries and wealth that kings of yesteryear couldn't imagine, and that is a fantastic bracha, tremendous blessing, but it comes at a cost. You see, it's very difficult to recognize that we are needy. It's very difficult for me to stand in front of my Creator and say, Hashem, I need, because Baruch Hashem, we have so much. Would you like to know what I'm talking about? I have a friend of mine whose father was a Rav in New York City around the Great Depression era. And his father told him that every Rosh Chodesh benching in shul, every time they bench Rosh Chodesh in shul, he would hear women on the other side of the mechitza openly wail. When they got to the part about parnasa and about sustenance, women would break down openly crying, raising their voices in wails. Why? Because in those days, if you couldn't pay your monthly rent, all of your earthly possessions were put on the sidewalk, and that's where you and your kids slept that night. And there was no social network. No one was there to bail you out. But we don't want, and we don't need. I don't know a person my age or younger who ever went to sleep hungry. And while that is a tremendous bracha, it comes with a real cost. And that cost is, it's difficult to see that I need. And it's difficult to see how much I depend on Hashem. And for that reason, I believe that's the first reason why it's difficult for us to daven on Rosh Hashanah. But this reason, I think, is easily solvable. And I'll give you one simple illustration to explain how we could solve this problem. Rabbi Naftali Trupp, World War II, pre-World War II Rosh Yeshiva in Europe, was once approached by a balabos. It was Slichos night, and this person in his community came over to him and said, Rosh Yeshiva, how could I say these words? In the Slichos it says, Kedolim ucharoshim dafaknu d'lasecha. Hashem, we bang on your door as poor, impoverished men. How could I say that? I'm a rich industrialist. I have 700 men in my employ. How could I lie? How could I say I'm poor? I'm not poor at all. And the Granat said, you're making one mistake. You assume that because last Rosh Hashanah you had a decree that you're going to keep your wealth, and you assume that this Rosh Hashanah you're going to have the same decree. But if you realize that it was an open question, if you realize that that question, whether you'll keep your wealth or not, is a question that's being weighed, measured, and decided, and there are no chazakas, there are no guarantees, you would understand that you are a dal and a rosh, you are a poor, impoverished man, because there are no guarantees. And I believe what the Granat is sharing with us is a profound insight. If you think about all of the issues of your life, and you realize that every one of them is an open question, and there are no guarantees. I'm young and healthy. Plenty of young and healthy people lose their health. But listen, I'm financially well taken care of. And plenty of very successful men find their entire industry shipped over to India. Plenty of successful doctors find that things change. Well, I'm a cardiologist. My practice is, I have to close it down. I have so many people coming in until the HMOs come in, and suddenly he's got to sell his practice to a hospital, and he's making a quarter of what he had been making. I'm in nursing homes. Come on, the government, the U.S. government pays takes care of me, until he finds out that state reimbursements are cut, slashed, and suddenly it's no longer the business you once had. When you realize that all of the issues of your coming year are open questions, and there are no guarantees, there are no chazakas, you begin to realize that we are very needy and very dependent, and with that understanding, you're able to stand in front of Hashem and say the words, I can't do it. Hashem, I depend on you. And I have a little Musar exercise I'd like to share with you. If you want to make your Rosh Hashanah davening real, want to make it powerful, open a newspaper to the obituary section. Now, I used to have to explain to people what the obituary section is. Now I have to explain to people what a newspaper is. You know that? Okay? Find the obituary section. And I have a little challenge for you. Look at all the pictures and read a few of the paragraphs, and you'll find something very strange. Very intelligent people and not so intelligent people. Very old people and young people. Very smart people, very ordinary people, very successful people, not so successful people, tall people, short people, fat people, skinny people, all different walks of life. In fact, you won't find a single common denominator amongst all of them other than one. The only common denominator is they all used to be alive and they are no longer alive. And then you take that difficult step. I too am flesh and blood. I hope it's many, many years from now, but there will come a day when I, the powerful, invincible me, will no longer be. I will be dead, over, done with, no more. And when you realize that that question itself is being judged, weighed, measured, and determined, and there are no guarantees. If you're 20 or you're 30, if you're 50 or you're 80, there's no guarantee because last year you were decreed for a year of life that this year you're going to have the same decree. Hopefully it will be that way, but you don't know. And when you begin to process through all of the needs that we have, you begin to think about all of the issues. And if you're married, you know that there are many, many things that you have to daven for siyata d'shmaya for help with. And if you have children, just multiply that by 10,000. Because kids, especially in our day and age, to raise wholesome, healthy kids is not simple at all. And when you realize there are so many issues, and you stand in front of your Creator and you say the words, Hashem, I cannot do it. One worldwide market crash, and we're all out of a job. One Mack truck hits me, and I am no longer. But more than that, I can't control the future. I don't know what's going to be. And then you begin to realize that I'm extraordinarily needy. I'm not invincible. I'm not invulnerable. Quite the opposite. I'm extraordinarily dependent. I'm very, very vulnerable. And you begin to realize that I need many things. And with that understanding, you could daven, you could ask. Because you recognize that Hashem is the Borei Olam, the Creator, and the one who maintains and keeps everything going. So if the first reason why it's difficult to daven is because it's hard to see how needy we are, I believe that the Granat's understanding helps. There are no guarantees, and every issue is an open question. But there's another reason why it's difficult for us to daven Rosh Hashanah. It has nothing to do with this. The second reason why it's difficult for us to daven Rosh Hashanah is because the judgment on Rosh Hashanah is different than any judgment that we'll ever live through as human beings. Let me explain what I mean. It was a number of years ago when O.J. Simpson was on trial for murder, and anyone who was paying attention to any part of the story understood that he murdered his wife in cold blood. The gloves fitting or the gloves not fitting, anyone who was watching understood that this man was guilty as charged. However, O.J. Simpson was taking the U.S. judicial system on trial, proving whether fame and fortune could buy his freedom. He hired the dream team, 5 of the top lawyers, including Alan Dershowitz. And the U.S. justice system was being made into a mockery. Now, the media covered every detail. The media were right all over it. And it was month after month of watching this circus. And it just so happens to be that the reading of the verdict was 2 days before Rosh Hashanah. And I remember saying to myself, I must be there. I must witness this. I parked myself in front of a TV and I got to watch the reading of the verdict. Now you have to understand, O.J. Simpson is sitting at the table, gripping the table. His entire future, whether he's going to be a caged animal or whether he's going to be let free, is going to be read to him. The jury foreman stands up and she opens the envelope and she reads the words, "We find the defendant not guilty." Wow! His face lit up. The joy, the happiness, the life that came into him. That's judgment in this world. Fact-finding, deliberation, judgment, and then the verdict is read. But when the verdict is read, the judge hears it, the jury hears it, everyone in the courtroom hears it, and the defendant hears it. This coming Sunday night, Hashem, we are going to stand in front of judgment. There will be fact-finding, there will be deliberation, there'll be a judgment, and there will be a verdict. But we don't hear the reading of the verdict. Whether I was decreed for a good, sweet year or not, I don't know. We walk out of shul, Rosh Hashanah night, we say, L'shana tov, v'tikasev, v'tichasem. We're supposed to be boteach, we're supposed to trust in Hashem's mercy, and with that understanding, we go home. It's a Yom Tov, not quite the full Yom Tov, it's a little bit held in check. But the point is, we don't hear the reading of the verdict. And because we don't hear the reading of the verdict, it's very hard to feel it. It's hard to understand that it's real. It's hard to relate to it as something that's actually happened. Because we don't see the reading of the verdict, we don't hear it, it's hard to relate to it. But I believe that this problem is somewhat curable. The Shafier says, if you want to really work on your Rosh Hashanah davening, he says, I'll explain to you a way to do it. Most people make a mistake. Most people come into shul and say to themselves, oh my goodness, I have so much in this coming year to focus on. So many issues, my family, my future, my work. And they begin with that perspective and they ask Hashem for help in all of the areas that they need help in. Shafier says you got it backwards. Don't do that. Don't go forward. Go backwards. Go backwards over your past year. Review all of those strange events that happened. And you happened to meet this guy on the street corner. He happened to make this recommendation, and you got your biggest client of your life. 2 months before that, you were walking up the stairs, and somehow, you don't know why, you looked up and you tripped and you broke your leg. Review those 5 or 10 events of your past year that you had to admit was Hashem's intervention. When you said the words, it's Hashkacha, I get it, it's Hashem intervening in my life. By the way, if you pay attention, it's not 5 or 10 during the course of the year, it's probably 5 or 10 a day. But find the 5 or 10 that are clearly noticeable to you and say to yourself, I get it. Every one of these was decreed on the previous Rosh Hashanah. Every one of these 5, 10 incidents was decreed to happen on the previous Rosh Hashanah, and then you get it. The judgment is real. Why? Because it's my life. Those are events that happened to me. I was there, and now I get it. That happened in March was decreed in the previous Rosh Hashanah. That which happened in February was decreed on the previous Rosh Hashanah. And when you do that, it becomes real. And I have a little exercise that I'd like to share with you. If you want to really change Rosh Hashanah davening, you have a few days between now and Rosh Hashanah, take 2 index cards. On one index card, write down a number of incidents that occurred to you this year that were clearly strange, that don't make sense. And you get it. You understand that that's Hashem. Write them on one index card. And again, if you're paying careful attention, it won't be one, but it'll be a number of index cards. And on the other index card, write all the issues of your coming year that you need help with. All the things that you're dependent on Hashem for, all the things that you aspire and wish to be, and bring both cards into shul with you. And hold both cards up. And you look at this card and you say, this and this and this was decreed on the previous Rosh Hashanah, and you get it. The din is real. Then when you come to this card, everything you need this coming year, suddenly you're begging, beseeching, imploring, you're really davening because you get it. You see, we mortals don't really understand. We don't really relate to it. There's a story told about the Stipler Gaon. About 30 years ago, when he was in his 80s, he was the acclaimed leader of the Jewish nation. He lived in Bnei Brak. And he lived in a very simple apartment, and all afternoon long the apartment was jammed wall to wall with people coming for a bracha, people asking questions, and all day long he basically would sit there looking down. A person would come by, ask a question, he would answer or give a bracha, person after person after person. One afternoon the Stipler's sitting there looking down. The apartment is filled wall to wall. A man comes in, and suddenly the Stipler looks up and points, Russia, wicked one, wicked, get out of here. The man who the Stipler was pointing to turned white as a ghost, ran out the door. No one understood why. A few hours later, Someone comes to the stipler and says, Rosh Hashiva, Schuldig, the man that the stipler called a Rosh, a wicked man, is not so wicked. That man got into a car. That car had a number of other occupants in it. The car was involved in a terrible collision. Every other person in the car died. That man alone was spared. Obviously, he's not a wicked person. And the stipler said, don't you understand? When he walked in the door, the Malach HaMavis, angel of death, walked in with him. The only way I could spare him, if you embarrass a person publicly, it's as if you killed him, it was the only way I could save him. Once upon a time, there were people like the stipler who could see the Malach HaMavis, the angel of death, walk in. But we don't see. We're clueless. But I'd like to share with you one observation. If you daven in a shul big enough, I guarantee that on this coming Rosh Hashanah, there'll be many beautiful decrees. A woman who couldn't find her life's partner, this is the year she'll find him. A couple who for a decade could not have children, this year they'll have a child. A man who went from job to job, couldn't find anything. This is a different year, a banner year for him. I guarantee there'll be many sweet, beautiful decrees. But I also guarantee that there'll be many decrees that are not so sweet. People who will lose their health, people who will lose their businesses, their wealth. And I also guarantee that if you daven in a shul large enough, there'll be at least one or two X's. One or two people who will not be with us next Rosh Hashanah. But we don't see it. The Shana Tova, Tikasev, dip the apple in the honey, good, sweet, yeah, good, I hope you. And we go home, and we're supposed to be happy, trusting in Hashem, but we don't see the reading of the verdict, we don't hear it, and so it's very, very difficult for us to relate to it. And because of that, I think we are sound asleep. You know, I was a Rabbi in Rochester Yeshiva for 12 years, and the initial years especially, we used to make the trip from New York City to Rochester regularly. My parents, Alayhim Shalom, used to live in Kew Garden Hills. So on a regular basis, we'd make that trip. It's about a 6-7 hour drive. Usually we'd leave later in the day so the kids would sleep most of the trip. I remember when my oldest daughter was 2.5 years of age, I clearly remember strapping her into the car seat in the back. We used to play this game. Abba, I'll drive. No, I'll drive. You drive. Okay. In any case, it was a February day. We left New York City late, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock. I strapped her in. My wife got on the passenger side. I began driving. And a few hours later, I get onto 81 North. Now, 81 North is a trucker's highway, 2 lanes, no shoulder to the highway. And as I get on the highway, sheets and sheets of snow began coming down. The visibility went to almost nothing. But the problem was there was no shoulder to this road. I couldn't slow down and sort of pull off. The only thing I could do was I tried to slow down a little bit. And as I'm slowly trying to bring the speed down, suddenly the car starts swerving and it makes a full rotation right on the highway over both lanes. And it makes a second rotation. And as I'm going into the second spin, I see behind me an 18-wheeler coming this way, my car going this way, and I said to myself, there is nothing that I can do. Somehow our car ended up on the embankment, an 18-wheeler wished by. I looked at my wife. She was pale. I had just lived through the most harrowing moment of my life. And I looked back at my 2.5-year-old in the car seat, and she was sound asleep. When I look around shul on Rosh Hashanah, a lot of people to me look like a little child sound asleep in the car seat. Every issue of your coming year, every issue of your life is being decided, weighed, measured. And you have this power called tefillah, and you could change things. Oh man, I hope it goes fast. Oh, the rabbi's going on and on. I hope my wife made something good because I'm really hungry. This davening, oh man. And sometimes I look about me and I say, what is going on? It takes work. It's not intuitive, it's not as instinctive as we wish it could be, but if a person prepares himself, if a person gets ready, then Rosh Hashanah, Aseret Shmei Tshuva, Yom Kippur are beautiful days. What the Malachim was saying was, the Jewish nation should sing out joy and jubilation, they should say Hallel, they should be dancing. There should be such an overwhelming sense of joy. Why? because you could perceive, you could understand, you could relate to Hashem in a way that you can't normally. Rav David Kronglass, the Mashgiach of Ner Yisrael, used to say on Yom Kippur, if it weren't for the Eimas Adin, if it weren't for the fear of judgment, I'd be dancing in the aisles, I'd be dancing a jig. Why? Because a person can reach a whole different plateau, a whole different level of understanding, of relating, seeing Hashem, experiencing Hashem, looking at the world and understanding, getting it finally. And a person should walk into shul and experience tremendous joy, and I believe that's why the Malachim said we should sing Hallel. And when Hashem answers, it's true. There should be tremendous simcha, tempered, held in check with a sense of gravity that there are many, many issues being weighed, being decided. But both emotions should be there. Tremendous joy, tempered by a sense of there are a lot of things going on that are very serious. And I believe if a person does the work, if firstly you come to this one cognition, I may be healthy and well, I may be financially secure, my children may be doing very, very well right now, but there is no guarantee. And if much like that man who came to the Granat, I'm a wealthy man, how could I say to Hashem I'm poor? The Granat said to him, that's true, because last year you had that decree, doesn't say what the decree will be this year. If we understood that every issue of our lives are open questions and there are no guarantees, it makes it much easier to understand how needy I am, makes it much easier to daven. And if the problem is that the din isn't real, I don't feel it, I don't hear the reading of the verdict, the answer to that is hear the reading of the verdict of last Rosh Hashanah. Look through your year, review your year, and by the way, pick up a year in review. Pick up Time magazine, pick up one of the years in review, and look through all of those events and say to yourself, I get it. Every one was decreed on the previous Rosh Hashanah, and suddenly the judgment is far more tangible, far more real. It takes work, it takes preparation. Rosh Hashanah, Aseret Shmei Tshuva, Yom Kippur are supposed to be beautiful days. You could accomplish during that time period what you cannot accomplish the rest of the year. And a person should be looking forward with anticipation, with excitement. Let's go. If your mindset is appropriate, if you do the necessary work. And I want to close with one story. I'm very fond of the story because it happened to a good friend of mine. Every detail of the story is exactly as I'm going to tell it to you, and I only found out how accurate it was because my friend told it to me, and I began telling it over, and I was in some community, and someone was in the audience and said, you're right, that's exactly what happened, because she was there. In any case, there's only one detail. He asked me to change his name. Other than his name, this is what happened. Chaim Goldstein was living in Kew Gardens. His brother-in-law was living in Forest Hills. And the agreement was going to be that that Shabbos, both families were going to be by Chaim. Chaim's wife cooks and prepares all Shabbos. Thursday night, she's about finished cooking. Her sister calls her up and says, you know what? My husband came home late from work. He's tired. You know what? Instead of, we're not going to come. We're going to stay home on Shabbos. Chaim's wife says, when are you going to stay home? Come on, I cooked already. Do come. Don't come back and forth. Finally, Chaim's wife says, listen, I made the whole Shabbos already anyway. Let's do this. I'll pack up the food. And instead of everybody being by me, we'll all go to you. So that's what they agreed. So Chaim, his wife, his kids, packed up the stuff, packed up the food, and went to his brother-in-law's house for Shabbos. Okay. Chaim describes that when he walks into his brother-in-law's apartment, on the coffee table is a book, Who by Fire. Now, I don't know if you've read this book, but it's a very, very moving book. It's a story of a young woman living in Yerushalayim, and she's in her apartment, and suddenly the apartment bursts into flames. And she rushes out, finds herself in the hallway untouched. And when she's in the hallway, she realizes that all of her children are still in the apartment. She runs in, grabs one kid, runs in, grabs a second, grabs a third. In the end, she saved all of her children, but she suffered burns on 85% of her body. Hence, the name of the book, Who by Fire, because in Rosh Hashanah is not just decreed who will live and who will die, but the exact method. And it's a beautiful story of a woman's emunah of our bitachon, but it's also a harrowing read because you get to see what it's like to be burnt alive. In any case, Chaim is a big masmid. He was in Kollel then. And normally on Shabbos he would learn Gemara, but he describes that he picked up this book and he was mesmerized. He was glued, he couldn't put it down. He read it cover to cover. He didn't think much about it, but Shabbos afternoon, mincha, he walked into the yeshiva, and when he walked into the Beis Medrash, he noticed that everyone was looking at him. Why were they looking at me? My tie, my suit, what's going on? I don't know what to takes a sitter, down Shemon Esrei. After Shemon Esrei, he takes 3 steps back. He looks up and again notices that everyone is looking at him. Why is everybody looking at me? After davening, he goes over to a friend of his and says, why is everybody looking at me? His friend said, you didn't hear? Chaim said, no, hear what? His friend said, well, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but last night your house burnt down. 2 a.m., a fire began. The entire 3-story building was consumed in flame. Everyone there was killed. Chaim, his wife, and his children were untouched because they weren't there. They were by the brother-in-law. But the pivotal moment of Chaim's life was not that previous Thursday night conversation, do come, don't come, my place, your place, The pivotal moment in Chaim's existence was the previous Rosh Hashanah. And Chaim was shown, read the book. On the previous Rosh Hashanah, there was a diyun, there was a judgment. And for whatever which reason, you and your wife and your children were spared. But read the details. This was the judgment. And this is what you were spared from. Folks, I believe we're a little bit like that child in the car seat, sound asleep. If we realized the gravity of the issues being determined, we'd be alive with prayer, we'd be alive with davening, begging Hashem, imploring, please. But it requires waking up. It requires getting out of that robotic mode of just doing and running and running and doing and just hypnotically going through the motions. To wake up, it requires some thinking, some understanding. You have to spend time alone without any static, without any noise, without people or devices grabbing your attention. And you have to think. You have to review your life. Every Jew has a story. I sincerely believe that every person in this room could get up here and tell their story of how they ended up here, and one else of us would be their mouth agape. And how do I know that to be true? We live close to our Sameach in Muncie, and I regularly try to have the guys over. And in the Shafier house, nothing is free. Any guy who comes for a Friday night Shabbos afternoon meal has to pay for his meal. What's the price? He's got to tell his story. And Baal Tshuva, after Baal Tshuva, has to tell his story, how he became from. Sometimes we go easy, we let a guy get up to gefilte fish. Every once in a while, maybe to the soup, but not beyond that. And I have to share with you, the stories that come out are incredible. My children sit there open-eyed, mouth agape, and I can tell you we collect the stories and every one is better than the next. But the reality is that every Jew has a story. And when you study that biography, that autobiography, the one that you write, at least in your own mind, and you recall the events of your life, and you realize how I got here, how I ended up in this place, how I ended up in this situation, and you say, I get it. Hashem runs the world. Hashem was putting me into position. Hashem was putting this one here. Hashem was orchestrating things. And then you go back and review this past year in detail, and you realize that every one of those events was decreed on the previous Rosh Hashanah. Suddenly it's real. Suddenly it's vibrant. You feel it. You daven. And you understand the day. It's supposed to be a beautiful day, tempered with a sense of gravity. It's a day that a person can grow and accomplish. I want to take questions, thoughts, observations.
Where is room to grow through the year? In other words, if everything's written on Rosh Hashanah, then we feel somewhat scary because we have to do all sort of children now and asking out. Then there's a whole year.
Okay.
Nothing changes if we become better or...
Good question. Okay, good question. Can I answer with a mashal? Okay, here we go. It's Rosh. You hear the question? If everything's decreed on Rosh Hashanah, so where's the room to grow during the rest of the year? Why daven during the rest of the year? Okay, good. Here we go. It's Rosh Hashanah. My towel's over my head. I'm shuckling away, davening. Suddenly I hear a voice. Shafier! Oh, I was sent from heaven. Yeah, what? I was sent to tell you that this year you'll make $1 million. Whoa, $1 million bucks. Wow. I heard a baskol. I heard the heavenly voice. I leave shul, happy as a lark. I quit my day job. Don't even look in the stock market. I heard the baskol. I go about my business knowing full well that I'm going to do well this year. what is going to happen to me this year? I'd like to share with you that if I quit my day job and don't do anything, I'm going to go hungry. Why? Because when it's decreed in heaven that you're going to make $1 million this year, that's provided you do your part. Your part is to earn a living. You get a job. To stay healthy, you exercise, you eat right. If you want to get married, you go out, you find the person. If a person says, listen, I'm already 24 and I'm sick and tired of this dating game and I'm not going out anymore, I'd like to share with you, most likely you're not going to get married. But Bashert, 40 days before you're born, Bashert, that's very nice. Bashert means Hashem decrees what's appropriate, what's proper, provided you do what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to use the world in the way of the world. If you do your part, this is Bashert, this is decreed, this is accessible, this is available. However, if you decide that steaks this thick are really good and smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day is like a really fine thing to do and you weigh 400 pounds and you're 35, don't go blaming God when you have a heart attack. Because the decree is, provided you use the world as you're supposed to, provided you do your part, this is what's accessible, this is what's available, this is what's appropriate. So, if on Rosh Hashanah it was decreed that I should make a lot of money this year, I have to do my part, namely I have to work. But one of the biggest parts, if not the biggest parts of Ishtadlis is davening, is prayer. And if I decide, it's determined already, and I'm not going to daven, it's probably the equivalent of not going to work and all bets are off. Sometimes, for whatever which reason, Hashem will allow a person to succeed anyway, usually not. But the point is that it's part of our Ishtadlis, part of what we have to do, davening and growing. It is sometimes possible to change a decree during the course of the year, but regardless, it's part and parcel of what we're supposed to be doing, and if we don't, we abdicated our responsibility, and then all bets are off. Yeah?
When I'm trying to daven on Rosh Hashanah, and I'm davening with the Kal, so when exactly is all this beseeching, or individual beseeching, when is the best time? Like I know in Shema coming in with regular davening, that's when I add an extra, but on Rosh Hashanah, with Mafia, Shofars, and everything, where do you, is it like the best part of Shemoneh Esrei? It's a long list, and I can either daven with the Kahal, or I get a daven in my, like I don't know where to put it.
Okay, so let me let you know a little secret. I don't know that many people who finish with the Shlich Tzibur. In fact, I don't ever remember hearing the word Baruch Atah Hashem. I don't ever, in all my years of davening, so don't worry about going longer in your own personal Shemoneh Esrei. There is a particular place at the very end of the bracha, what would be the equivalent for Shabbos, Mekadosh Shabbos, we say on Rosh Hashanah, Mekadosh Amo Yisrael, Rosh Chodashim, that part we have the request for saying Chalkeinu B'Soresecha and Tahar Libenu. That part is kind of like the Shema Kolenu of the Shemoneh Esrei, but you could do it at any part after Hamelech HaKadosh, before the end of the Shemoneh Esrei. You could insert during Ma'alchei Shofars. So I'll explain to you why. Let me ask you a question. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to make requests, right? Let's say my business is failing. I'm not supposed to daven to Hashem on Shabbos for that. If I have a child who's sick, I'm not supposed to daven. Monday, Tuesday, the whole week long, you daven. But on Shabbos and Yom Tov, we don't make requests. We're supposed to have this attitude that all of our worldly needs are taken care of, Hashem takes care of it, and we don't make requests. Why do you make requests on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur? So the Bali Musa explained that if I understand that Hashem is the shofet, Hashem's the judge, and I understand the power of tefillah, I'll be a liar if I don't daven. It's a steer, it's a contradiction, meaning my recognition of Hashem as the melech, as the king, and my recognition of the power of davening demands that I daven. What it means in plain language is simply like this. The main avoda on Rosh Hashanah is to mamlech Hashem, to recognize Hashem as the melech, as the king. There is no more potent way to recognize Hashem as the king than to recognize that Hashem determines my future. It's very easy to sit back and say, God's the king of the world, wow, India and Africa and the tribes, it's amazing, wow. It's very easy to be mamlech Hashem, to recognize Hashem as the king over the world. It's very difficult to be mamlech Hashem over me, because that means that I'm dependent, that means my future, and it's a very, very unsettling, a bit unnerving, and it's not so comfortable. When you make these requests and you ask Hashem, what you're doing is the highest level of being Mamlech Hashem, because you're getting it that Hashem is really the king. Hashem is really in charge because it's my life. It's real. If 50 people die in China, I feel bad. That's nothing compared to if it's my family. It's far more real, far more right here. And so it really is being Mamlech Hashem. Long and short of it is, any point after Melech HaKadosh to the end of Shemona Esrei, certainly when you're done, Elokayim Surah at the end, when you say Yilur Ratzon, after that you can say whatever you want, but don't be shy. Any point after Melech HaKadosh you can insert and say whether it fits the Shemona Esrei really or not. Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for ways to occupy your time between coming home in the morning and then going back to shul at night? A lot of times I run into this problem. I'm just bored at the way I
Okay, that's a good problem. Try to find something that you could read that's meaningful. I have a great book I could recommend to you. Stop Surviving, Start Living. And if you think I'm kidding, I'm not. I think it's, I wrote that book? Because you wouldn't write it. No one else would write it. I said, somebody's got to write it. You'll see it. It's a very good, any Musa Sefer really is very, very good. Anything that speaks to you and lets you see, you could access concepts and understandings on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur that you can't during the rest of the year. So it's a shud to waste it. So every moment is precious in the sense that you could delve, understand. So certainly if you could read Musa Svarim or things, that would be very, very useful, very helpful.
Why don't we bend Rosh Chodesh to Shabbos?
Okay, that is a fine question. So Rosh Hashanah is not, there's no benching Rosh Chodesh for Rosh Hashanah. One second. There's no benching Rosh Chodesh for Rosh Hashanah for Tishrei because I think I know why, but I'm not sure. And I'm going to say these words. Listen to these words. They're the best words to say. I don't know. Let me say it again. I don't know. I don't know. Now, why are those such good words to say? Gemara in Bracha says, teach your tongue to say the words, I don't know, lest you lie. So let me say the words, I don't know. It's better. I believe I do know because it has to do with Kabbalas Eidos, but it's good for me to say, I don't know. It's good for you to hear it also, so I don't know. Next question. And if you stump me again, I'll live with it. I taught high school. Nothing phases me. 12 years. I went through the ringer. Nothing. Okay, anyway, I thank you very much. Again, the shmuz.com, you could download the app, you could go to the site, and we have books here. I thank the JCC of Marine Park and Shia Rubenstein. Thank you. A good show.